I'm going to call Ian Lees-Galloway.
Very much, Mr. Chairman. Some of the debate around this bill has gotten a little bit silly. It's got a little bit out of control. David Seymour's nodding his head and he would know. I want to focus on what I think is the one thing that we can salvage out of this debacle, which is Andrew Little's proposed amendment to add the question. Calm down, boys, because we're actually trying to. I think from talking with people overnight, actually what people want to see is a little bit of dignity and decorum in this debate. And when we actually try to address some substantive issues and we get laughter and barracking from the other side of the House, it does nothing to actually add to the decorum of this debate. So I want to address this question of whether or not we should be asking people, do you want to change the flag? And I've heard an odd argument against why we should do this, which is that people need to see the option before they decide whether they want to change the flag or not. But actually, people are going to be presented now with 5 options. People are going to know exactly what they're going to be voting on if they decide to go to a second referendum. People know exactly what they're going to be doing. And we did this when we went to MMP. This is exactly the process. The Minister is shaking his head, but he obviously has as bad a memory as John Key does. This is exactly the process we used with MMP. We asked people, do you want to change the voting system? And then the second question at the first referendum was, regardless of how you voted in that first question, if we were to change, what would you change to? And that worked perfectly well. There was no question back then that people needed to know which electoral system we would be changing to if we decided to change at that first question. And it gave us the opportunity to ask people, is this something we should actually be pursuing? And I think it's even more important that we include that in the first referendum because so many people have come forward and said, we don't agree with change, or this is not the right time. We ought to get the books back into surplus. We ought to deal with the $105 billion worth of debt that the government has amassed before we deal with this issue. We want to have an opportunity to say, no, we don't want to proceed and spend money unnecessarily. Or there's a lot of people out there, and I know New Zealand First are sort of representing this part of the electorate that just do not want to change. And so we should simply ask that question. Is this something that we want to do? And I think it disrespects the intelligence of the voting public to say they can't make that choice before they have voted on which of the options they want to change to. So I again implore members to support this amendment proposed by Andrew Little. We know it works. We've got previous history of using exactly this process and it working well, and it is something that people want. 50,000 people signed a petition asking to include Red Peak. We could have included Red Peak without this legislation. Let's make that clear. We do not need this legislation to include Red Peak. So this is a sham, and even more of a sideshow. But anyway, never mind. People spoke up and said they wanted Red Peak. Well, actually, tens of thousands of people also signed a petition saying we want to have the opportunity to say yes or no at the first referendum. So if this is about, and 80% of the submissions to Select Committee, 80% said they wanted the opportunity for the yes/no question. So if we're responding to what the public wants, and if we're going to indulge in the poll-driven behaviour that we've seen from the Prime Minister, then let's include this question, yes or no, before we even go to having the expense of a second referendum.
Jamie Lee Ross.
I move that the question be now